So my name is Michael King from the Massachusetts Family Institute, and I'd like to start out with my favorite slide, which is why I do what I do, and I'm sure it's why you do what you do, because family is so important. And the way God set up family is so important. And so this is our clan. Jesse's here with us this week. Judah's here, and then you guys might have met Levi yesterday, and then Ezra and Daisy. So I like to say we have an Old Testament tribe growing at home. Here's our common mission dedicated to strengthening the family and Judeo-Christian values upon which the family is based. And it's a nationwide partnership, so there are 40 MFIs, if you will, across the nation. So there's a chance that, like if you live in Connecticut, there's a Connecticut Family Institute. If you live in Maine, there's a Maine Family Institute. If you live in Vermont, we're still trying to get one started there. We partner with Alliance Defending Freedom. We are the local associate to focus on the family. How many of you guys have heard of Alliance Defending Freedom? So ADF, they do a lot of work with the baker, for example, in Colorado, that's now been sued 4 times to bake a transgender cake, a homosexual cake, and now a Satanist cake. And then the Family Research Council does on a national level what we do on a state level, so that's Tony Perkins, if you're familiar with them. So if you follow the Southern Poverty Law Center, you know that FRC is a hate group, according to them. So that's our nationwide partnership. We care about the definition of marriage, now the definition of gender, religious liberty, and the sanctity of life, both at the beginning of life and at the end of life. In my presentations, I like to say that you are not alone and you are not crazy for having a biblical worldview. And first I want to start with you're not alone. Now, how many of us in here are from Massachusetts? All right, so it might be surprising to you that you are not alone for having a biblical worldview in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I'm going to show you why. According to the Secretary of State's office in Massachusetts, there are over 8,000 churches in Massachusetts. Does that surprise anybody? 8,000 churches. There's 351 towns and cities in Massachusetts, so do the math. That's a lot of churches. Now in Iowa, which would be considered less liberal, right, there's 4,200 churches. Now, is Iowa considered churched? Right? Yeah, I think we'd all say yes. Well, Massachusetts has double that. And I would even say that Massachusetts has more than 8,000 churches. And much of the reason for that is the immigrant church in Massachusetts, which is enormous. This is one of those churches in Lawrence. In the city of Lawrence, there are over 100 churches just in the city of Lawrence. In Mattapan, there's a church of about 5,000. This is the largest church in Massachusetts. You guys know in Massachusetts there was a 5,000 member church, right? In downtown Boston. Ebenezer, this is the mother church of those 100 Hispanic churches in the city of Lawrence. This is Eagle Heights, and these are all places that we've spoken 1, 2, or even 5 times. Eagle Heights in Revere, just north of Boston, another large church. This is an Ethiopian evangelical church, a night service there in Cambridge. This is an 1,100 member church in the city of Lynn. So if you're familiar with Lynn, how many of you guys knew that there was a 1,000 member Hispanic church in the city of Lynn? And then just down the street from this 1,000 member Hispanic church is a 2,000 member Hispanic church. Here's the Evangelical Free Church in Westfield, a large population there. Here is a Russian Pentecostal church in Westfield. We've spoken here twice. They have almost 1,000 members. Did you guys know there was a Russian Pentecostal church in Massachusetts? Anybody? Nobody? Okay. Always? All right. Yes, we have. Okay, yes, of course. Yeah. You guys know all about these. This was a gathering of 5 Hispanic churches, 4 of which are in Massachusetts, of over 3,000 in attendance in Marlborough, Massachusetts. I spoke here about Bible clubs. This is a large church in Princeton, in the center of our state. A lot of homeschoolers go to this church. Here's a Hispanic church in Waltham. Because of this one church in Waltham, there's no pot shops, no recreational pot shops in the city of Waltham. So one Hispanic church made that kind of difference. And I'll get more into that story if I have time later. So I just want to make that statement that you're not alone. Okay? So be encouraged as a believer. Now, I want to talk about religious liberty, and I told you for those of you that are news junkies, this is going to be some information that you probably did not hear in the Boston Globe. But this is stuff that we've been up to in the past year, and out of the 30 years that we've been involved in Massachusetts, last year was by far our most successful year ever. So thank you, COVID. So the reopening of the church. Now, many of you, if you're watching the national news, you heard California, Michigan, New York, and these states had all locked down their churches, and in phase one, none of these churches were open. But did you ever hear Massachusetts being mentioned in that line of states? Well, you would have expected to hear Massachusetts, but you didn't, because of the work that we had done behind the scenes to make sure that the church was considered essential by our governor. So on May 18th, Governor Baker, if you were listening intently, one sentence he said in his press conference, and he almost said it under his breath, was that churches would be reopened in phase one. And why did that happen? How did that happen? Well, if you follow the story of Pastor Chris Casey down at Adams Square Baptist Church in Worcester, you guys ever heard of Worcester, Massachusetts, right? So the second largest city, not only in Massachusetts, but second largest city in New England, Chris Casey kept his doors open because across the street from Adams Square Baptist Church on Lincoln Street in Worcester is a liquor store. Now, was that liquor store staying open when the lockdowns were happening? Of course. And down the street, was the recreational marijuana shop staying open during lockdown when the churches were closed? Of course. And was the Planned Parenthood abortion clinic still open when churches were locked down? Of course. So that was our point, was you can't treat all these other industries and keep them open, but you can't treat the church unfairly. And the church should be the first one open because of the First Amendment, but I digress. So Pastor Casey ended up suing the governor. Now, should pastors be suing the governor? Absolutely, right? And he was criminally charged 3 times, and we supplied him an attorney, and he ended up winning his case, right? So, thank the Lord for Chris Casey taking a stand. Because of the work we've done to network churches in Massachusetts, we had over 500 pastors sign a letter to the governor saying that the church is essential. And between this letter to the governor and what Chris Casey did in Worcester, the church was reopened in phase one. And we continue to educate churches. Many of you guys might have seen those COVID guidelines. Were they ambiguous by any stretch, right? Maybe purposely so. We became the general counsel for many of these churches. Churches were told you couldn't meet after 10 o'clock, and we had a lot of churches that would have midnight vigils, and so, well, they wanted to go to church at midnight, so they should be allowed to, and they did not have to cooperate with those guidelines. There were 4 Brazilian churches in Somerville when the mayor of Somerville, Mayor Curtatone, said, well, when you pass from Medford into Somerville, somehow COVID mutates. We don't quite understand the science, but you can only have 10 or less people at your churches in Somerville. And this is when churches were open at 50% capacity. So we looked for churches in Somerville that would be willing to send a letter to the mayor and say, look, you cannot treat the church differently. And so we found 4 Brazilian churches. They wrote a letter. They worked with Liberty Council. Not Liberty Council, First Liberty. I sometimes get the two mixed up, but you guys heard Jason Alexander earlier this week from Liberty Council, another wonderful organization. So we wrote this letter, and churches remained open at 40% capacity in Somerville. In Framingham, they told the churches you could not sing. So how many of you guys would love to not sing at church service, right? That's kind of important, right? So they went to their city council and they won. In Fitchburg, the local board of health told the church called Crossroads, about 1,000 people in Fitchburg, that they were responsible for a COVID outbreak in Fitchburg. Now, they didn't do their study, and they defamed the church. So we supplied an attorney to the pastor, and what ended up happening was the board of health director got fired. In New Bedford, we supplied, in New Bedford actually, there was a church that renovated a supermarket, okay? So 40,000 square feet, and our whole spiel was, well, you can go to the supermarket and have no capacity limit, but if you want to go worship, you want to go buy bread at the grocery store, no problem, but you want to worship the bread of life, all of a sudden you're limited to 100 people in New Bedford. So we did a federal lawsuit recently to open churches at 100% capacity in Massachusetts, and we won. So the trend that you're seeing here is that 100% of the time that we got involved with churches, from a judicial point of view, we ended up winning even in Massachusetts. So as Alex said, there were some great school trends, and thank God for COVID. It was the best thing that could ever have happened for homeschooling, and it was the best thing that could ever happen for church schools. So be encouraged, you residents of Massachusetts, that more and more churches are opening up schools in Massachusetts, and we're going to see more of this. There's a church in Westminster that just opened a great school. There's a church in Plymouth. There's a church in Chicopee that just called me, and there's a 500-member Hispanic church in Worcester that just called, said they want to start a school, and that's just the first bit of church schools starting up in Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts, you might not have known this, but relatively speaking, we are friendly to homeschoolers. That might surprise many of you, but if you talk to HSLDA, they will say the same thing, and so now we're encouraging churches just to become a space and just to have everyone register as homeschoolers and do it super simple. And more churches are getting on board with that. So what have we also seen in Massachusetts? We've seen 3% of the school-age population were homeschooled before the pandemic. 52% of families are reporting more favorable views of homeschooling. And one survey found that 40% of parents say they are more likely to homeschool or virtual school after COVID-19, while another survey found 60% of parents are likely to continue homeschooling. So that's pretty cool. Well, if you're following the news, you might have seen that Massachusetts was the only state to mandate the flu vaccine. Now, I'm not talking about the COVID vaccine, I'm talking about the flu vaccine. So there was an organization, about 1,000 parents in Massachusetts, called Health Choice for Massachusetts Action. I don't know if you guys have heard of them or not. But they sued the governor. You see a pattern here, a lot of suing going on last year. Well, they ended up winning, and so the mandate on the flu vaccine was debunked, was taken out. I had brought this up at a recent hearing, and they said, oh no, the governor just changed his mind. I said, no, Representative Lewis, he was actually sued, and that's why he changed his mind. There's just to encourage you as well, there was a recent religious exemption hearing, so if you're from Connecticut, I'm sorry that you guys just lost your religious exemption regarding the COVID vaccine for students. But in Massachusetts, we recently had this hearing. Over 400 people showed up at the religious exemption hearing, and 90% of the people that spoke agreed with us on this issue. So I've never been a part of such a lopsided hearing, and this was in Massachusetts. After speaking to many of the representatives as well, they believe that this piece of legislation is going nowhere, which is very encouraging. So students, hopefully you'll get to keep your religious exemption. Work options, school options. We're getting these calls all the time. I'm sure you guys are seeing this in your own lives or friends' lives, of workers saying, I might have to take this COVID vaccine at work or lose my job. Unfortunately, there's not great precedent for you as a worker, but we want people to call us so that we can figure these things out together. But your employer should offer you reasonable accommodation, and that can be ambiguous, but at least that's your first approach. Now, students, you have a lot more protection, so you have the religious exemption still in Massachusetts, even though we just saw this form from the UMass Lowell that said, if you decide not to take the vaccine at UMass Lowell, you will be kicked off of campus. Even if you have labs, you cannot come back, and your tuition will not be refunded. So that's quite tyrannical, if you ask me, but this is why we need to band together and work. We need to work together on this issue to keep pressure on our schools. So text the word parent. I want you guys to do a lot of texting while I'm talking today, if you don't mind. Text the word parent to 797979 if you'd like to get a copy of the religious exemption form in Massachusetts, and also if you'd like to learn more about the medical and religious exemption in Massachusetts, please do that. Text the word parent to 797979. Did you know that in Lynn, they're no longer offering Fs, right? So I was just talking to a teacher in Lynn that said that she could prove that over half of her students failed last year in her Spanish class, but her authorities have said we're no longer giving out Fs, so if your student just showed up for a second, literally a second online, didn't do any of the homework, didn't do anything, but just showed up, they get a D, okay? So is that what our tax dollars are going to pay for in Massachusetts? In her professional development, they were teaching CRT. Now, this isn't a surprise to you guys, but she was being asked to sign a pledge that she would not be a racist at school. Now, the ironic thing is that this teacher is a Venezuelan immigrant. In Wellesley, they have these things called affinity space. You guys heard of this? Affinity spaces? So maybe today's Tuesday. Well, this is for Asians. They have a specific affinity space that nobody else can go in except Asians. Or maybe Wednesday, it's for African Americans. So they have their affinity space. Have you heard of anything more racist than that? This week in Townsend, Pepperell, and Ashby. I don't know if you guys are from anybody in here from these towns. Townsend. All right, good. So we should talk. So Townsend, Pepperell, Ashby just had a school committee meeting this week, and they were told that if they got their form in by 5 o'clock to the superintendent, that they could speak at this school committee hearing. Well, they did that, and they were denied their right to speak at the school committee. The school committee only allowed 4 of them to speak, and only 2 of them were speaking on this issue of CRT. So now there's this whole movement in Townsend, Pepperell, and Ashby to meet with the school committee privately and to see if they've violated any public meeting laws. And we're continuing to follow this story closely. But isn't it encouraging that 55 out of the 60 parents that showed up to this meeting were against CRT? Right? So again, you're not alone, even in Massachusetts. And that's a lot of parents, right? 60 parents showing up to... We got the call on that at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and because of the networking we've been able to do, we were able to generate this kind of response within 5 hours, right? So it helps. If you're looking to network and bring people together in your community, call me, because it's very likely that we have a network of people in your community ready to roll. Wouldn't it be great if all of our schools, if we're still going to keep our kids in the public schools, to start a Bible club? You know, one of the cool things I just found out about, we work with National School Project, which has an over $1 million budget to start Bible clubs in public schools all across the country. They said that some of their best advocates for Bible clubs at public schools are, who do you think? Yes. Homeschoolers, right? So what a great balance, right? Homeschool your kids, take them out of the public school, and then send them back to the public school in terms of ministry after school. I think that's a great idea. So this girl in the middle, her name is Rosa. She's from the city of Lynn. She wanted to start a Bible club at Lynn Votech this about 2 or 3 years ago. So she put up her posters, as any club would do, and she was told by her principal that she had to take her posters down. And so she called us because we spoke at her church, and she said, look, I'm being discriminated here at school. We said, yes, you are. We wrote a letter to the principal. Same day the principal gets the letter, he goes to Rosa and he says, Rosa, I made a mistake. Please put your posters back up. Well, she put her posters back up, and that spring, her whole Bible club, about 15 and 20 people, sang a worship song in Spanish at their talent show. I said, sang a worship song at the Lynn Public School and ended up winning first place. So if you'd like to see more Bible clubs started at your public school, please text the word Bible to 797979. And now with our partnership with National School Project, that is a very robust program where they train up students to start these Bible clubs at schools. Real quick on religious liberty as well. This is already passed in Massachusetts, the counseling ban. So if you are a licensed therapist, you cannot help a boy feel comfortable as a boy. That's hate speech. You could lose your license. And this is the individual that's leading the charge. So the question I always ask is, should Sam Brinton have more influence over the well-being of our children than the local church? Picture tells 1,000 words, right? Say no more. And then lastly on religious liberty, text the word equality to 797979 on the Equality Act. I'm sure many of you guys are already familiar with this, but this would be a nuclear bomb to your religious liberty. So if you're, for example, a church and you don't want to have a trans pastor, right? You might want to think about calling your local representative and senator regarding the Equality Act. Text the word equality to 797979. All right, let's hit the sanctity of life. And here we're concerned not only at the beginning of life, but the end of life. So be encouraged. This is Massachusetts, guys, okay? So keep that in perspective. We had over 1,000 people show up at the State House on Planned Parenthood's signature piece of legislation called the Roe Act, okay? The most egregious abortion bill in the United States of America. We outnumbered Planned Parenthood at the Boston State House. And here's just some more pictures from the day. So know that you are not alone, and if you want more information on this particular issue, text the word SAVE LIFE, all one word, SAVE LIFE, to 797979. Now, unfortunately, this Roe Act is now law, if you've been following the news, in Massachusetts. So under the cover of night, back in the lame duck session last winter, Amendment 759 in the budget was where you would have found the Roe Act. Now, do we usually pass like super controversial bills in our budgets? Or is that where we should be passing them, is in our state budget where nobody knows? I mean, would you guys have known that Amendment 759, did you even know there were 759 amendments in your budget, right? And 759 was this particular bill. Quite evil on how they went about this. Well, we were able to get the governor to veto this bill after the legislature had passed it, but there were over 2/3 in the legislature that said, no, we want abortion after birth to be legal in Massachusetts. Now, if you'd like to see this bill, this now law, be repealed, please text the word SAVE LIFE to 797979, and you can sign up to volunteer, because we are now doing a referendum in Massachusetts to repeal this law. Why are we so concerned about this law? Because current Massachusetts law requires late-term abortions, those performed after 24 weeks, to be performed in hospitals where life-saving equipment is readily available. And this act basically removes that provision, so expecting mothers could undergo late-term abortions, which carry significant risk of complications outside of a hospital setting. Also, if you are a minor, so you're 16 or younger in Massachusetts, you know what you need for a Tylenol at high school? If you said parental consent, you'd be right? So you need parental consent for a Tylenol, but under this new law, you need no parental consent, nor do you need a judge's bypass to get an abortion after birth. And then also the Roe Act eliminates the current requirement to preserve the life and health of the aborted child. So basically all the safeguards that were in the law have now been stripped from the law. So now there's no protection in the law for a baby born alive. So this obviously is not how we treat the most vulnerable in our society, and really encourage you guys to get involved in this. And again, text the word SAVE LIFE to 797979 to repeal this awful, awful bill. All right, so we're talking about not only the beginning of life, but the end of life. So we want to stop physician-assisted suicide. Text VALUE LIFE to 797979 for more information on this. Again, this is a bill that'll come up for a vote this year. We had a young mom from California show up. She's got 4 kids, and she lives in California, like I said, where assisted suicide is legal. She was denied her chemo for her cancer at the age of like 41 or 42, and they said, you know what, it's too expensive. The insurance company told us it's too expensive. So you know what we'll do for you is we'll provide for you these drugs that will end your life. And she's like, oh, well, what's the copay? So for a mom of 41 that's struggling with cancer, has 4 kids, this is the price that the insurance company puts on her head. And so this is why I want you to text the word VALUE LIFE to 797979, because this is not how we should be treating young moms. Be encouraged. 2 years ago when this was up for a vote, we defeated it. We had 80 minority pastors sign a letter to their legislators and defeated assisted suicide, but we want to do that again this year. All right, let's talk real quick about sex ed in the public schools. Alex talked a lot, some about this, but this is a vote that's coming soon that Massachusetts now wants to mandate, wants to have a mandate for sex education in public schools. So if you teach sex ed in your public school, which 90% of schools do in Massachusetts, you will have to now come under the frameworks, which haven't even been posted yet, but they want to vote on the frameworks, and then they'll tell you about the frameworks after the vote. Text the word education to 797979 for more information on this. But what are they teaching your kids, or who is your teaching kids this stuff? Well, Planned Parenthood, of course. So many will say, why is Planned Parenthood teaching safe sex? Does that make any sense? No. Right? I mean, if your goal is abortion, right, why are you teaching safe sex? Right? Well, it makes sense when you say, okay, well, we're actually going to teach you how to have sex so that you can actually have unwanted pregnancies, which I even hate saying that phrase because it's horrible. But we're going to force you to have unwanted pregnancies so we can have more abortions. Now, doesn't that make sense? Right? And wouldn't that be why they're teaching sex ed and making kids more curious at school? So they're redefining abstinence, and this is from the Planned Parenthood curriculum. So you can see at the top there it says wait, and that's 100%, it works 100% of the time. Okay, so we all know that to be true, to abstain. But then these are all the other methods of safe sex, right? One includes the depot shot, which is 3 months of hormone that can be pumped into a 12-year-old girl's body and even sterilize her. And now in the city of Lynn, for example, you can get that shot as a 12-year-old without parental consent. And here's some more, here's one, saran wrap. Do you guys know saran wrap was a good one when you're in a bind? So anyway, that's what's being taught to our kids, okay? So not to get too graphic, but that's what's happening in your middle school and in your high school. So you might want to know about it. But I'm sure most of you guys are already homeschooled anyway, but you can take a Bible club and go back into your school and minister that way, hopefully, as well. Have you guys heard about the family tree? I'm sure you have, right? Well, in the city of Lynn, they teach the sexuality tree. You guys heard of this thing? The sexuality tree. So now you look at all your relationships through the lens of sexuality as opposed to the traditional family. And I'm sure you guys have seen this before, the gender-bred person, right, being taught in our elementary schools that your gender comes from your brain, has nothing to do with your anatomy, right? Your orientation comes from your heart, right? This is taught in preschool, the gender unicorn, with 5 different spectrums. And if you haven't seen this presentation before, I always like to put this in because I think it really brings this issue home. This is called the spectrum taught in our high school. This was in Beverly, Massachusetts. It says at the top here, our sexuality and gender identity are not set in stone. Oh, really? Is that medically accurate? In fact, people's identities can be fluid. The spectrum can help you visualize how you feel at any given time. Mark how you identify today at each line, but don't feel limited. It's okay to mark something different when? Tomorrow. So your gender identity can change in 24 hours? Is that medically accurate? Is any of this age appropriate? Well, if you look there at the fourth line down, it says gender presentation. How does the world see you? What if you're that 12-year-old tomboy, right? You're a girl that likes to do boy things, and all of a sudden you're getting bullied online and you're getting bullied at school, and all of a sudden you start thinking to yourself, wait a minute, I always thought I was a girl, but now my teacher's telling me that maybe I'm a boy because I like to do boy things. And then you start taking puberty blockers, and then you sterilize your body, and then when you become 19, we know that 90% of 19-year-olds that want to change their gender, actually when they turn 19, they say, well, no, I think I am actually anatomically what I am. And then they're like, I want to go start a family, and then she can't because somebody gave her wrong information at 12. And so who's abusing this tomboy girl? Right? You and I? Not a chance. Well, be encouraged. In the city of Worcester, again, the second largest city in Massachusetts, we defeated Planned Parenthood in 2019 with 80 people showing up to the school committee. And here's some more pictures from that night. Packed house, many pastors and churches in the room. And so we can win these battles, okay? And now in Worcester, we have what's going to be the largest opt-out movement in the state's history. We already have a group of parents that meets every week. I meet with them on Zoom. And we're going to be getting as many kids as we can to opt out of pornographic sex education. So if you're traveling through Worcester in the next month or two and you see these yard signs out there, you'll know who's behind that. If you want to learn more about what's going on in Worcester, you can text the word Worcester to 797979. And you'll get all kinds of great information. And please pass that along to anybody that you know in Worcester so that we can get all these kids out of sex ed. We put together a sex ed map for you as a parent. So as a parent, if you go to your school and you say, please, can you tell me what they're teaching kids at school at sex ed? Do you think that school's just going to all of a sudden give you the curriculum like they should? Of course not, right? So what we've done is FOIA requests to the schools in Massachusetts, and we put together an interactive map for you so that you can hover over your town or city and find what is being taught in your town or city. So for example, if you live in Lynn, this is a whole synopsis of what's going on in Lynn, who teaches it, what's going on in high school, what's going on in middle school, and then we give you a whole harm analysis in terms of, cliff notes of the curriculum. If you live in the city of Lowell, here's some detailed information of what you'll find there. If you're on Facebook, you can go to Massachusetts Informed Parents, and we're starting more and more of these groups across the state, so please check this out. Even if you don't live in Massachusetts, this is really great information on what they're teaching our kids in the public school. Massachusetts Informed Parents, if you just look that up on Facebook, you'll find it. And then also we'll do a parent forum. So one evidence of the tipping point where we're seeing the churches getting more active in Massachusetts is we were recently asked by a church to come and give a parent forum on a Sunday morning. Now think about that. On a Sunday morning for 45 minutes, we came and talked about comprehensive sex education from the pulpit. That's pretty cool, right? That churches are now willing to get that exposed even on a Sunday morning. And that church, I didn't mention before, is starting a school and already has 9 families signed up. Here's a story in the western part of our state. Just wanted to make mention of this, where you can see the agenda of this is very intolerant. So there's a teacher of 21 years that was recently fired because she had the audacity to talk to a parent and tell him that his daughter was transitioning gender at school. And because she revealed this to the parent, she has now been fired at her school. And she was a 21-year veteran at the school. And we provided her attorneys, by the way, so she's fighting that currently. Did you know that in Somerville they just okayed polygamy, right? So man's mind does not stop at transgender, right? It just keeps going down that rabbit hole. And then lastly, about 5 minutes left, I just want to touch base on this commercial marijuana issue, and this is just to encourage you. We've been fighting this since 2016 in Massachusetts. So of the 351 towns and cities in Massachusetts, 250 of those towns either opted out or passed a moratorium. So that might surprise you, because I think the marijuana industry thought that Massachusetts would be a slam dunk, but it wasn't, because we were able to educate so many different towns and cities. So many parents got involved. You know that church I talked about in Waltham? If you're familiar with Massachusetts, Waltham is just outside the city of Boston. It would be a fantastic place. If you were looking to start a marijuana shop, this would be the place to do it. But Waltham, because of these Hispanic churches, 125 people showed up at their city hall and made a big stink about recreational marijuana, and they defeated recreational marijuana to this day, since 2016. For the past 5 years, no pot shops in Waltham because of this church. And I was sitting with them at this meeting, and one of them says to me, "Where are all your American friends?" And I said, "Well, Field of Dreams, you go talk and they'll come," right? I mean, if you've seen the movie, right? But, it's been encouraging that so many Hispanic churches have really been fighting this battle in Massachusetts. And speaking of Hispanic churches, 200 of them showed up on a snowy night in Lynn to protest against the mayor regarding recreational marijuana. And this was the best story of them all in Lawrence, with those over 100 churches that I talked about. Lawrence was the first city in Massachusetts to completely ban commercial marijuana, because 200 people showed up in 2017 at their local city hall and told their city council, "We don't want recreational marijuana." And there were so many of them that this was the overflow room, and this was the city council chambers. And I put Luke 18 there because that's the story of the widow, right? She goes before the judge, and she's super annoying to the judge, but it's biblical to be annoying, okay? It's biblical to be the squeaky wheel. And they got the whole city council 9-0 to vote unanimously to ban recreational marijuana in the city of Lawrence. And how do I know this? I took this picture at about midnight at the city council there in Lawrence. So be encouraged. The stories going on in Lawrence, the opt-out going on in Worcester, Bible clubs getting started in Lynn, outnumbering Planned Parenthood at the Boston State House, and excited about what we're going to do with the referendum to repeal this law. We'd love to see each church adopt their own legislator. So this is our 200 for 200 mission. So if your church is in Massachusetts, we'd love to see you guys do what this church is doing in Pittsfield. And this is Pastor McIntosh's church. We're in the foyer there. They have a picture of the state representative and the state senator, and then they have our one-page briefs. And so every time you come to church, you know who your state senator is, who your state rep is, so you can pray for them, and so you can also petition them on these issues, right? And is this biblical? Of course it is. Paul tells us, "I urge them, first of all, that petitions, prayers, intercession, thanksgiving can be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness." How many of us would love to live a peaceful and quiet life? Thank you very much, right? But can you do that just by sitting on your hands? Of course not, right? You have to be active, you have to petition, you have to pray. And when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. The commentary, it's my commentary, is run for school committee. right? I think that's what the Lord's trying to tell us there through Solomon and the Proverbs is let's get some righteous people ruling. And then if you'd like to find out more about us and get this wonderful guide that goes through a lot of the issues I've talked about, just visit mafamily.org/engage, mafamily.org/engage. And this is a great curriculum, really, if you're homeschooling, good curriculum to go through to get a biblical worldview on a lot of these issues that we are dealing with in our culture. I'm going to assume that most of you did not hear about these stories in the Boston Globe or whatever the newspaper of choice is in your state, but we've started the New Boston Post. So we live in a time, people, that we need to start building our own economies, building our own media, building our own communities, right? Because our institutions have let us down, our governments have let us down, our churches have let us down, our schools have let us down. So it's time to build, right? So we're building the New Boston Post. For $40 a year, you can subscribe to thenewbostonpost.com. And then last year, as I mentioned, was our best year ever. Fundraising was our best year. Our relationship with the church exploded because we went from, being seen as a right-wing political group maybe to a really a trusted ally, a trusted general counsel to the local church. So when we used to speak at a church once every quarter, now we speak at a church twice a week. And then lastly, if you'd like to give to MFI, just text the word donate MFI to 797979. Just give you a little perspective of what we're up against money-wise in Massachusetts. So these are all the organizations that are anti-life, LGBTQ, anti-religious liberty with a $21 million budget just in Massachusetts. And last year we had our best fundraising year ever with $600,000. But would it surprise you that all the successes we had last year and in the past few years we've done with 3 full-time employees? 3 full-time employees. We'd love to increase that staff so that we can reach more churches and be even more effective. So I want to thank you guys for listening. I hope you were encouraged that you're not alone and that you're not crazy for having a biblical worldview in Massachusetts. Thank you.